got a green light.
Thank you. Now we have a green light. So Hebrews chapter 11 has been the major document that we'll look at. All kinds of characters, various applications, but the point was made, since we have in chapter 12, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses that complete that and overcome these difficulties. The conclusion in chapter 12, verse 1, therefore, that's the point of all these people being introduced. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses, and the witnesses are, you can overcome. You can keep on keeping on. You don't have to stop no matter what happens to you. Since we have such a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that's set before us. There's a new race for everyone. Each person has a difficulty. Each person has a need for faith to overcome the difficulties, so they can just keep on keeping on. They don't quit. The whole book of Hebrews is about people who are so tempted to pull back and to quit, to go back to something that's a lot easier for them. But the point is, let us run with endurance the race that's set before us. This morning we're going to talk about one of the heroes of faith. At the end of his life, the king sat and talked to Gehazi, the servant of Elijah. And he says, please tell me all of the wonderful things that Elisha has done. He was an encouragement, and they were well known. And so the king wanted to let him go over all of the different things that Elijah has done. In order to understand the course that was set before Elijah and what Elijah did, need to briefly understand the time frame, the timeline of where Elijah is working. The kingdom has been separated into two main camps, the north and the south. And Elisha is that red dot on the timeline. He is working in the north. What's so unusual about the north? Give me the setting that he's working in. Idolatry? Where did it come from? That's right. Good question. Good answer. Okay. So Elijah's going to go right into the mouth of the beast, and Elijah and Elisha will continue God's work. Some places it's described as a small, quiet voice. But he has a job that's beginning as a helper. He is described as a man who poured water on Elijah's hands. He was a servant. He starts off a servant. And God uses him the rest of his life in a famous way. He was a wonderful witness of what could be done with faith. Wrong way. In the south, Jehoshaphat strengthened himself against Israel at first. And he placed troops because of the conflict all over Judah. He was faithful to Jehovah, following David's example, and did not seek the Baals. So the south was strong. Verse 6, he took great pride in the ways of the Lord, and again removed the high places and the Asherim from Judah. And he created great reforms in the south. But the north is still continuing the ways of Jeroboam. In 50-year time, there are great changes in the religion of the north. There is the open adoption of the worship of Baal through the influence of Jezebel. It became the national religion. But during this period of time, the Lord sent Elijah and Elisha to oppose this great sin that was being promulgated in the north. But there is more peace and cooperation between the north and south during this period. And they renewed ties between various political parties around that surrounded them. And God looked at what was being done in the south. Great things were happening for Judah. Now the dread of the Lord was on the kingdom of the lands which were around Judah, so that they did not make war against Jehoshaphat. The Lord was able to control the environment that was present in the south. In verse 12, so Jehoshaphat grew greater and greater, and he built fortresses and store cities in Judah, and large supplies in the cities of Judah, and warriors, valiant men in Jerusalem. So it was a great time in the south. It is about to be a golden age in the north. Things are going to appear wonderful. It couldn't be any better. And so they are happy in the north. Let me read through a few verses that better set the events of what's about to happen. And the Lord said to him, go return to your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram, which is Syria, and Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint king over Israel, and Elisha you shall anoint as prophet in your place. So there are going to be big changes. Elisha is going to continue the work of the prophet that Elijah has been working. He didn't bring fire, but he brought an example of a faithful man of God to the people in the north, in opposition to what was happening in the north. There had been a kingdom established that was totally against Jehovah. Through what influence? Which influence had that been happening? Well, we'll come back to that. So Elijah succeeds, and Elisha succeeds Elisha, and is accredited by great miracles. And the story that we want to talk about begins with the ascension of Elisha, but first a test. Elisha was a man who simply washed the hands of Elisha. Who would want to follow such a servant? Who would know that this man spoke for God and spoke the things of righteousness? He had to be accredited, and it's done in the same way that all God's prophets are introduced to the people that they're trying to help. Wonderful miracles. Elijah wasn't like that to start with. Elisha. And it came about when the Lord was about to take up Elijah by a whirlwind into heaven, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And the question was, what will it take to turn this man away? How strong, how faithful is Elisha? And Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives, and as yourself live, I will not leave you. So he expresses great allegiance to Elijah. So they went down to Bethel, and the sons of the prophets who were at Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you not know that the Lord will take away your master from you today?" And he said, "I know, be still." The question, would a long trip through the mountains and down the river valley turn Elisha back? And Elijah said to him, "Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho, and the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho approached Elisha and said, "Do you know that the Lord will take away your master from you today?" And he answered, "Yes, I know. Be still. Don't talk to me about that anymore." Well, then Elijah said to him, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jordan." And he said, "As the Lord lives and as yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. So Elisha is introduced as a faithful servant, dedicated to his master, dedicated to sticking with it. Now 50 men of the sons of the prophets went out. That's the school of the prophets that Samuel had started, and stood opposite them at a distance while the two of them stood by Jordan. That didn't work correctly. No, it didn't. There are two men with a sign of Moses' power. And Elijah took his mantle and folded it together and struck the waters, and they were divided here and there, and the two of them crossed over to dry ground. Now it came about that when he crossed over, that Elijah said to Elijah, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please, let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." And he's asking for the mantle of leadership. Let me take your place. Let me take the role of leader of the efforts that Elijah has been doing. And so he's taken up and while he's watching, he's taken up in a chariot of fire to heaven, and he drops his mantle, and Elijah has it. So he is accredited with being the survivor to the work that Elijah is doing. The first sign that's given to the people around to accredit Elisha, was an answer from God. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him and struck the waters and said, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And he also struck the waters, and they divided here and there, and Elisha crossed over. Now, when the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho opposite him saw him, they said, "The spirit of Elijah is on Elisha." So these acts of accreditation make Elijah the successor to the work and the authority for being a prophet. What was the answer to Elijah's question, "Where is the God of Elijah?" Yes. Yes, he is now having the mantle of authority, that the God of Elijah is with him. Well, I keep the wrong button, excuse me. Steve had suggested a passage for us to concentrate on in this study of Elisha. And this is the beginning of that verse. Now there came a day when Elijah passed over to Shunem, and there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat food, and it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat. She said to her husband, "Behold, now I perceive that this is a holy man of God. Elisha was being accredited. He's going back and forth probably from the south to the north, passing by this area. Please let us make a little walled upper chamber, and let us set a bed there, and a table, and a chair, and a lampstand, and it shall be when he comes to us, he can turn in here. So she makes a home for him to stop. And one day he came here and turned in the upper chamber and rested. Then he said to Gehazi as a servant, "Call the Shunammite." And when he had called her, she stood before him and said to him, "Say now to her," he tells Gehazi to say to her, "Say to her, behold, you have been careful for us, and all this care, what can I do for you? Would you be spoken to for the king or the captain of the army?" So Elisha's influence has grown. He can speak to the king about various people or the captain of the army. They know about Elisha. He is now bearing the mantle of authority, and the king will listen to him. And she said to Gehazi, "I live among my own people." Well, Gehazi tells Elisha, "Truly, she has no son, and her husband is old." He said, "Call her." And when he had called her, she stood in the doorway. Then he said, "At this season, next year, you will embrace a son." And she said, "No, my Lord, O man of God, don't lie to your maidservant." This was news. It was just incredible to her. She had done nothing to deserve this. Well, time passes. When the child was grown, the day came when he went out to his father and the reapers. He said to his father, my head, and he said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon. Then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door behind him and went out. Then she called to her husband and said, "Please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return." He said, "Why, you want to go today? It's neither new moon nor Sabbath." And she said, "It will be well." She just left her son on the bed dead, and she runs looking for Elisha. What do you call that action? It's a desperate action. But what is she exhibiting that's necessary for the resurrection of her son? She's exhibiting the faith that will act. It is her faith that's being talked about in chapter 11, I think. Women received their dead back. What a wonderful thing. And her action was, "It will be well." Then she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, "Drive, go forward, do not slow down. The pace, don't slow down for me unless I tell you." So she went and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. And when the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi, "Look, behold, there is the Shunammite. Please run now to meet her and say to her, 'Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child?' And she answered, 'It is well.' And when she came to the man of God, to the hill, she caught hold of his feet. And Gehazi came near to push her away. But the man of God said, 'Let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her. And the Lord has hidden from me, not told me what's wrong.' Then she said to Elisha, Did I ask for a son from my Lord? Did I not say, Do not deceive me? Well, I keep going the wrong button, excuse me. Then he said to Gehazi, Gird up your loins, take my staff in your hand, and go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him. If anyone salutes you, do not answer, and lay my staff on the child's face. The mother of the son of the lad said, As the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you. And he arose and followed her. That phrase, as the Lord lives, I will not leave you, has applications to our faith. I remember one young lady some time ago obeyed the gospel, and I was down front talking to her, and her reply to me was an earnest look in my face and said, I will be faithful. A determination like Elisha and like this Shunammite. As the Lord lives, I will not leave you. And she arose, and he arose and followed her. And when Gehazi passed on before them, laid the staff on the lad's face, but there was no sound or response. So he returned to meet him and told him, The lad is not awakened. That wasn't the thing that Elijah thought was going to happen. Where is the God of Elijah? It didn't happen. Did he quit? Did he just give back up and say, well, maybe next time? No. When the man of God saw her, I'm sorry, I keep the wrong button here. When Elijah came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered and shut the door and behind them both and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth and his eyes on his eyes and his hands on his hands and stretched forth himself on him. And the flesh of the child became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house once back and forth and went up and stretched himself on him. And the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes, and he called Gehazi and said, Call this Shunammite. So he called her, and she came into him, and he said, Take up your son. Then he went in, then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed down herself to the ground. And she took up her son and went out. Where do you see faith in this story?
Like it might have been a test for Elisha, but he never gave up. He didn't say, well, it wasn't in the Lord's hand. He knew it would happen. He believed in the Lord and prayed for the Lord. So we continue to do that at childhood. We just let sometimes we lose heart.
Okay. Was it well with her in her heart? Did she believe somehow that God would answer his prayer? Yes, she did. By faith, she listened. She said, Don't let anything get in my way. Don't stop. Let me go see the man of God. He can help me. So, unorthodox medical treatment laid on him, and he got well. But the presence of the Lord in this woman's life does not go away. And Elisha restores the Shunammite's land. Now Elisha spoke to the woman whose son he had restored, saying, Arise and go with your household, and return and sojourn wherever you can sojourn, for the Lord has called a famine, and it will come to the land for 7 years. And the woman arose and did according to the word of the man of God. Read this again. So the woman arose and did according to the word of the man of God. What do you call that? You ought to call that faith. She did what the man of God said. God had been a blessing to her life before, and the way for blessing was to listen to the man of God and act. So the woman rose and did according to the word of the man of God, and she went with her husband and sojourned to the land of the Philistines 7 years. At the end of 7 years, the woman returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went out to appeal to the king for her house. Why would she do that? Well, Elijah has said, do you need somebody to represent to the king? I can do it. Elisha has said that. Somebody had squatted on her field, just pushed her out. So she went to the king. And it just so happened. Now the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, Please relate to me all the great things that Elisha has done. So he just happened to be talking about that subject. And as he was relating to the king how he had restored the one who was dead, and behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life appeared to the king for her house and for her field. And Gehazi said, My lord, O king, this is the woman. This is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. The king answered the woman. She related it to him. The king appointed for her a certain officer and said, Restore all that was hers and all the produce of the field from this day she left until now. And there is a phrase I see, reminds me of God's working, and it just happened. It just happened at the very time the servant was talking to the king about what Elisha has done. There that woman is, and there her son alive from the dead. An effectual change in her life where she got everything she had needed before restored to her, and there's a wonderful change in her life. One of the wonderful things that Elijah had done, is there anything you want to add about the Shunammite before we go on? Who had the act of faith in this story? What?
You certainly did. She might want to have faith, a persistent faith, faith that wouldn't stop, faith that wouldn't turn loose. We're going to see that.
Okay.
Faith that said, she said, go, I'll go, and say go. She said go to the land, come to family. She did it. A lot of faith in her life.
Okay. Yes, Joy. Okay? Does faithful endurance stop one time, 2 times, 3 times? Does God notice that? Does God arrange things for the faithful? Those who keep on keeping on? Yes, the Shunammite woman would gladly say, I am a witness to the faithfulness of God who responds to faith in people's lives. And therefore we ought to keep on keeping on. When there's times of failure, you have to keep on keeping on. What happened when Elijah's wonderful rod laid on the boy and nothing happened? Did he turn around and go back to? No. He went and did what he could. I wonder how many medical schools would have said you need to lay on top of the boy, look in his face, hold his face. That wasn't going to happen. He didn't know what to do, but he did something calling on the name of the Lord for help. Okay. Elijah's great deeds continued. Elijah had been revealing the plans of the enemy. Now the king of Aram was warring against Israel, and he continued with his servant saying, in such and such a place I will camp. And the man of God sent word to the king of Israel saying, beware, do not pass this place, for the Arameans are coming down there. And the king of Israel sent to the place about which the man of God told him, and he warned him, so that he guarded himself there more than once. Now the heart of the king of Aram was enraged over this thing, and he called his servants and said, will you tell me which one is for the king of Israel? He suspected a traitor. Now the heart of the king of Aram was enraged. In verse 12, and one of the servants said, no, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. Who might have been that officer? Yes, the probability that Naaman, whom Elijah had healed, Elisha, would have known this. He is the only one. This is one of the great things that would be on record for Elisha. Let me go ahead. Psalm 34, verse 7. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and rescues them. Hebrews 13. Let your character be free from the love of money, being content with what you have, for he himself says, I will never leave you. Those words ring out. Elisha. It was characteristic of the Shunammite. I will not leave you. I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you, that we may confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What shall man do to me? And then also in Romans, what shall we say then? If God is for us, who can be against us? The story goes on to look at the invasion that's happened to the land. O Lord, I pray you, open their eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw, behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. It looked like an absolute disaster for Elisha's army, or for the king's army. Was Elisha biting his fingernails? Was he worried? Or did he have that understanding about what was in his life? Had the horses and chariots been there? We don't know how long. But Elisha, say that again, Keith.
Elisha may have counted on his faith to begin with, but he would have done.
What similar prayer could we say on each other's behalf? What can you say to somebody who's encompassed around with great, unstoppable enemies like this army that Elisha was with? Okay. Open your eyes. What is there that we can help others see? Pictures of what? Elisha said, open his eyes, Lord, that he can see. What are pictures that we can see? Okay. Barry says that how God is moving in other people's lives. What should be our spirit as we face the dangers and problems of life? Can you see the army of God that's circled around you? Can you see it? Okay. Are you aware that God's forces are around you? That He knows? That He's listening? He's there for you to fall back on? Elisha didn't live forever. When Elisha became sick with the illness about which he was to die, Joash, the king of Israel, came down to him and wept over him and said, my father, the chariots of Israel and his horsemen. That's the same phrase that Elisha had used when he saw Elijah going up in the chariot of fire. It pointed out the great appreciation that he had for Elisha. And the king of Israel came over to Elisha and said the same thing. Had he been accredited or not? Had his ability been published for people to see? Yes, he had. He was really revered for his work and power in people's lives. And Elisha said to him, take a bow and arrow. So he took a bow and arrows, and he said to the king of Israel, put your hand on the bow. And he put his hand on it. And then Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands, and he said, open the window toward the east. Then Elisha said, shoot. And he shot. And he said, this is Elisha's word to this king. The Lord's era of victory, even the era of victory over Aram. And you will defeat the Arameans at Aphek until you have destroyed them. And he said, take the arrows. And he took them. And he said to the king of Israel, strike the ground. And he struck it 3 times and stopped. So the man of God was angry with him and said, you should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck Aram until you have destroyed it. But now you shall only do it 3 times. What is the message about faith in this passage What do you see that the man of God was trying to tell him that would have some application to us? Okay. Joy says you keep on and on, Larry. The Lord's era of victory, even the era of victory over Aaron, for you will defeat the Aramean king of Egypt until you destroy king of Amalek until you have destroyed it. So what did the man of God expect? What did Elisha expect him to do?
Especially to strike it more time. I don't understand in this case. I mean, he told me to strike the ground. I would do it once. I've done what you said. So I don't understand how this man was to know to continue this, what this meant. He didn't know what it meant or anything. It's kind of difficult.
It is a difficult passage. But what did God, the man of God, expect him to do? How was he supposed to receive this news about the era of victory over this great enemy that was attacking them? Was his response one of enthusiasm? What would a man with great enthusiasm for the will of victory have done? Okay. What did this man lose? Because he didn't act with enthusiasm, that he didn't act with belief, that he didn't act with thanksgiving. What did he lose because of that action? He lost the opportunity. Okay. Lack of enthusiasm, a lack of trust, a lack of faith, expressed in lack of enthusiasm, robbed this man of a great victory in his life. What would be an application for us from this passage? The Lord's era of victory, even the era of victory over Aram. Make an application. We'd be glad to hear you, Joy. What's the application for us from this passage? Why is this passage here? This seemingly minor event in the life of this great man of God. What does it show for us as part of keeping on, keeping on? for trusting in the Lord, what does it show to us? It must be with a degree of faith, no doubt, no lack of enthusiasm. You should have struck the ground more times. It's not time for you to get up.
It may be that it's 6 arrows and you just pull all of them out and just hit with 3 of them. But I think what we learned from this is to not stop. Don't just go as far as you think you need to go and stop there. Keep on going. Go over and above what God expects. Don't just say, this should be enough for God, and I'll stop.
Okay. Is there anything in our lives like verse 18? Take the arrows, and he took them and said to them, strike the ground. Struck it 3 times and stopped. You ever stopped at something that you thought was doing good? Joyce pointed out she's keeping on. God, I'm going to make an application. God makes it clear that He's aware of our attitude. He's aware that we may stop. He's aware that we give up. He's aware that we can turn back. And therefore He's given us a great cloud of witnesses that says, listen, God's there. He knows what you're having trouble with. He knows, and He will help if you don't quit. Don't turn back into the weak and beggarly element. Don't turn back to giving up. You got to go with enthusiasm to a God and a man of God that will listen and help. And you rob yourself of a great opportunity when we just quit. That's the message of Hebrews. Don't quit. Look at all these people, men, women, prophets, who have put forth eagerness to please, eagerness to serve God without turning back. And their witness. What is a witness? A witness is the one who says, this works for me. The Shunammite would have said what? Right? What? All is well. Okay? That's a good point. Why was all well? What did she mean by that? She knew God was in control, that if she could get to the man of God and talk to him, God could fix these problems. But He expects us to respond with enthusiasm. Don't quit. Don't turn back. There's all these people who have said, it works. Go to God. Trust Him. Have faith in His way. There's going to be all kinds of reasons for you to stop. All of this great cloud of witnesses. From a servant man like Elisha, who used to pour water on Elijah's hands, all the way to an honored man of God. You can work it out. God will help you. Anything else you want to add? Time is up. Well, thank you for participating.